Hello, guys. Welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today, I'm going to be having Wow, it's going to be a very interesting conversation with Ada. I think we're all familiar with Ada Akbala, and she's my very good friend, and she's a friend of the channel. We've had multiple conversations on so many interesting topics, and I thought who better to talk to about this DEI stuff than Ada, right? But before we dive right in, did you watch the football match between Nigeria and South Africa yesterday?
Really? I don't do football.
Oh,
What
you,
is it?
you don't
World
you
Cup?
don't know there's an AFCON. You don't know there's an AFCON going on. We have to strip you of your Nigerianness. You
It,
no
it
longer
won't be the
Nigerian. How
first
can you not
time.
know we're playing football?
It won't be the first time.
Okay, so there is there's an AFCON currently going on, African Cup of Nations currently going on, and
Okay.
they just played the semi-finals yesterday. Nigeria versus South Africa. It was a roller coaster because at the point we were leading by 1 goal to nothing. Then we scored a goal, and the goal was cancelled immediately, and the free kick was given to penalty was given to South Africa on the
Oh
90th
wow.
minute, and they scored.
Oh
So it
my gosh,
was
that actually
1-1.
sounds like a game. Wow.
It was 1-1, and then we went into extra time, and then it went into penalty shootout, and the South African keeper had caught 5 penalties previously in a
Mm.
previous game. So I thought you're breaking up. Your camera is still. I don't know if it's your network or mine. Anand, Steve, can you see me? Can you see Ada? Can you see us well? Because she's from my end, she's breaking up. Am I breaking up from your end, Ada?
Not at all. Everything seems pretty fine.
Okay. So as it turns out, our keeper saved 2 of the goals. He caught 2 of the goals. So we won the game, and now we are on to the finals. And it was such a glorious moment. It was so good. It was so good to have that win. I'm so happy.
Nice.
If we
Nice.
had lost, it would have been devastating.
Yeah, I wish I
Yeah.
had more time or more interest to watch football games, but yeah. Way too occupied for that.
Yeah. So I think this will be a good place to delve right into the conversation. So for I think for some days now, it's the internet has been abuzz with DEI, 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 and all that stuff. And Charlie Kirk made some comments about black pilots. Candace Owens made some comments about women pilots, right? And even Glenn Lowry made some comments about affirmative action and all that. So we're going to be reviewing those clips, right, and giving our thoughts on it. But before we get into that, I'd like to hear from you because you are in the West, you're in Britain. I'm in Africa, I'm in Nigeria, right? So I may be seeing things from, I may just be seeing things from um, a skewed perspective, right, through the filter of social media. So I may not be getting the correct information on what's actually going on. You're in Britain, so you might. I know this DI stuff is more predominant in the US, but I think it's still something that would be found in the UK as well. So, what exactly is DEI, and how does it operate in the West?
Okay, yeah. So firstly, I mean, you mentioned that this is something that has been going on, for days, but this has been something that we've been seeing happening and in the conversation for years now, I would say. Um, I think in the UK, you have different areas where people want to include DEI initiatives or policies and things like that. So you have, for example, obviously in the professional world. So that could be in different fields, but you can also have like even in the entertainment industry as well. And even in our societies in general. And that's where you see people praise and, glorify things like multiculturalism and things like that. And it's all in that vein of representation, right? It's all under that umbrella. So trying to create initiatives where you have equal or as equal as you can representation, but when it only comes to sort of your major three. So in terms of racial identity, or some people say ethnic identity, in terms of your gender, and also in terms of your, I would say, your sexual orientation. So whether you're gay, you're straight, and things like that. So we're seeing this push to have, you know, representative to the population, to have these numbers, so sort of mirrored in these spaces. And I wouldn't say that it has no bearing to things that have happened in the past. There are people who feel that, based on issues that have happened historically, both here but also in the US as well, obviously different histories, but there has been that history of discrimination based on race, based on people's, gender and sexual orientation. So at first it started off as this, I would say, maybe genuine, obviously people always try to spin things to their own narrative and their own biases, but there were genuine concerns, about the issues that a few groups faced in the UK, right? But what it has turned into is this nefarious hunt for any issue. Before it was based on, okay, which group was discriminated against, let's try and fix it. Now it's become, let's look for every disparity that we can find in the media, in medicine, in profession, in the school. That must be to do with racism. Let's try and balance the scales and introduce DEI initiatives and stuff. So DEI, I think it has different meanings depending on who you ask, but it is under that general idea of having equal, not of opportunity, but equality of outcomes for each representative group.
So when you say equality of outcomes, can you sort of explain that more, how DEI tries to achieve equality of outcome?
So it's as simple as, we need to have the same number of people. If you take, let's say, what field can we take from in the professional world? Let's take medicine. So there are 15, as an example. Of course, the numbers are going to be more specific than that. But let's say there are 50 white doctors in this field compared to 2. For every 50 white doctors, we have 2 black doctors, 1 Asian doctor, which is completely the opposite in some cases. So what we are going to do is that we are going to stop hiring, shall I say, we're going to start purposely looking and getting people into our fields, into our profession that fit this specific identity, right? And that's what we even saw in the recent case of Aviva, which is an insurance company in the UK. And you have these explicit forms of discrimination under the guise of representation, under the guise of pursuing equality and fairness. So you had, I believe it's the CEO, I can't remember now, but she deliberately mentioned that no white men will be authorized for senior positions unless she gives the final say. So they have to be, forget about, looking for people from a pool of talent, of expertise, of experience, having that colorblind, idea. No. Okay, so these are your selections of people that you want for senior position. Let me now look at their racial identity. Let me now look at their skin color. And that will now be the deciding factor for whether they get that opportunity or not, right? So that's the general idea.
Okay.
There's now this picking and choosing of people, not primarily, which is what I think people get wrong, right? Not primarily based on their skin color always, but sometimes that's now the deciding factor for who is given the opportunity. And I say that that's definitely us going 10 steps backward.
Okay. So for me, I think DEI by its nature is discriminatory. Nobody can take that away, right? If you are purposefully you know, if you have any sort of quota system, you are going to have to discriminate against a certain people. That's a given, from my understanding. But from the way it's being portrayed, the major argument I'm seeing against DEI currently is not that it's discriminatory in a sense, is that it's a tool for hiring incompetent people. That the basis for hiring people is not on competence, but on skin color, or for on some superficial quality, right? So like the pilots, that's why someone like Charlie Kirk would say he will call into question the qualification of a black pilot, or why Candace Owens will say she will call into question the qualification of a female pilot. So I want to ask you, in this implementation of DEI, do they consider competence at all? Do they consider qualifications, or the most important factor is simply skin color, or the sort of diversity criteria that they're looking for?
I believe that people's main concern is about discrimination against white people or against people who are seen as those who bear societal privileges. I think the under performance or under qualification is secondary to people's main concern of reverse discrimination. In terms of people questioning the qualification or the expertise of those hired, let's say, quote unquote, based on their skin color, I think that's just based on past examples that we've seen where people have been admitted perhaps to universities or to positions, and they have been proven not to be qualified, not to, do the role as well as those who were whose skin color or race wasn't taken into consideration, right? And of course, you have specific examples like people like Claudine Gay, but even when you see the stats of people, especially more so in the US, where people who were admitted into these Ivy League colleges and they were below par and they struggled and it was detrimental to their own studies, right? So then you can see that if these people that are supposed to have a leg up, right, they're supposed to have this extra support, but yet when they're given those opportunities, are still failing, are still struggling, are still underperforming and underachieving, then you have to ask then of course you have to understand people's concerns. And then also, more than that, actually, and more specific to that, when you have calls for literally lowering standards, right? Whether that's test scores, these things have happened. These things have happened where people are saying that standardized tests are racist, right? Are a beacon of white supremacy and stuff. So if those kinds of conversations have happened, then people aren't saying, okay, I'm questioning the specific qualification of this person. What they're saying is, I'm questioning the processes that allow this person or led to this person being in this position, right? Based on past examples and past situations, right? So I don't think it's unfair to mock or sort of be skeptic about people's genuine concern about these things.
Okay. So I think that lowering standards, it's for anybody, it's a terrible idea. I mean, I don't think anybody should um, I don't think any society that wants to progress should go the route of lowering standards for anybody, right? But those things can be very specific to certain institutions, probably for admissions and all that, right? Does it apply to every industry in the West? I don't know. But talking about people who are hired with DEI being incompetent, right? I have to ask this question. Without DEI, for example, incompetent people are still hired anyway, right? It's not as if before the implementation of DEI policies, incompetent people were never hired. And it's not as if it's been proven that everybody who has been hired under the auspices of a DEI has come out to be has turned out to be incompetent. This might just be a selection bias. This might just be that we are putting a lot of emphasis, or putting a lot of touchlight on specific people, looking at very few examples and drawing conclusions from that and saying, you know what, this person, these people, they are incompetent. Now, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example with Glenn Lowry. His clip is long, so I may not have to play it. So he was complaining about affirmative action, and he said that he is a product of affirmative action, even though he didn't need it. Glenn Lowry did not need affirmative action because he was sort of a genius, right? But there were 3 spots in the school that he went to that were reserved for high performing Black students. So it wasn't as if they were just looking for just about any Black student. They were looking for what? High performing Black students. So obviously, someone like Glenn Lowry, also a product of affirmative action, not incompetent in any sense, right? But the school was looking for, okay, you know what, we need to increase our diversity pool. We want to bring in more people of color. How do we help these people in these communities who have been underrepresented, right? Knowing full well that part of the reason why these people are in this state was because of legalized and systemic discrimination for most of the history of looking at the US itself, right? So those were systemic issues, and those were things that were not just going to magically go away on their own without some form of action. So I'm really questioning the idea that the most important factor in DEI, in considering hiring people for using DEI process, is merely representation, that competence doesn't come into play. It is perfectly possible to say, I want to hire this many females, but I'm going to look for females who are competent enough to do the job, right? It's very possible to say, I want to hire this much Black people, but I'm going to look for Black people who are competent enough to do this job. But that's not to say that it's not possible for incompetent people to be hired using DI process. I mean, any policy can never be implemented to perfection. There are going to be people who take advantage of it. There are going to be misapplication of such policies, right? But I think that there's a lot of straw manning when it comes to DEI. I really, really want to see the evidence that, okay, DEI has led to the hiring of incompetent people any more than it would have happened in a situation when there is no DEI. Because I keep saying, without DEI, incompetent people were hired. Why and how were they hired? So do you have like, there, apart from maybe specific examples, is there some sort of data behind this? There's some sort of research that shows that people who were hired using the DEI process that the most important criteria was skin color or some other criteria aside competence?
But I understand what you're saying, but no one is saying that that DEI, or very few people are saying that. And or shall I say, I am not saying that, so I can't argue for that. My position is that DEI is causing reverse discrimination to happen. And if you look at all the institutions and all the companies that have put DEI at the forefront, of their organization, if you look at every single one, and if you look at what they're focusing on, it is the socioeconomic and or other identity traits of future or potential candidates. No, they don't emphasize the competencies or looking for people who are, or what you're emphasizing. We had recently, was it Oxford Uni? Who was? I think it was, or was it the American Psychology Association? And they were the ones that were claiming that hiring based on merit is unfair. So if you're saying that hiring based on merit is another way to say competency. So if that is unfair, Charles, I'm asking you, and this is one of the major institutions in the United States, please tell me where the emphasis is. They haven't said, yes, people from lower socioeconomic background they've had it worse, so they haven't had the opportunities and things like that. They're now talking particularly about merit. And we see this time and time again. So if you have one of the major institutions in the United States saying that hiring based on merit is racist or unfair, don't you think that that leads people to conclude that other institutions or organizations or companies are reading these journals, right? Reading these, pseudo research findings and trying to implement it into their own organizations, trying to embed it in their own cultures, right? So I don't buy it that, and I agree with you. I think on the other hand, it is a very racist idea actually to think that a black person, or I hate this terminology, but a non-white person is in a certain space because they are black or because they are there because of affirmative action. I know when I go for opportunities, this whole DEI culture has definitely made me and some people very uncomfortable, because you think, am I, has he gone? I can only see myself. Hello? I can't see the chat or anything. So I will just finish what I'm saying, and then I guess it's going to hop back on. But it has made, this DEI culture, it kind of puts that added pressure on those who think that they're being hired based on their identity rather than, their skills, their expertise, right? It, of course, inadvertently creates this, feeling that people, are being chosen or being looked at or being given opportunities, not because of their skills, not because of things that they actually bring to the table, but maybe because their own skin color is what's being looked at, right? Or to fill a quota. No one wants to have this, feeling going into a place or going into, an organization or into university and so on and so forth. So I disagree. I disagree and agree. I think yes, it's not. It doesn't correlate that just because there have been a few spotty examples of people who have underachieved, or there's research showing that those some admitted because of um um these quotas and so on don't sort of drop out early from programs and things like that. I don't think that that then translates to DEI meaning underperformance or underachievement or just being given, a free pass. Because yes, I agree that or I disagree with people that say, well, if I see a black pilot or if I see a black female, then I have to have this sense of fear, or I have to be afraid because, did they pass these? And it's like, well, I definitely won't be approached to ask to fly a plane. I tell you that now. So there are certain criteria, there's certain, steps that one has to go through. But now the question is, Charles, which is what I am pushing back on, are those processes lowered or differed in any way for someone who has come from a lower socioeconomic background, someone who has had a history of this and that? That's what people are asking. People aren't saying that it's point blank, someone who's not white is not competent, but they're asking what is that criteria for measuring their level of competency? Has that been changed? Is that lowered for someone that's not white? These are valid questions people should ask. And like I was saying when you went off, that I also have to ask that for myself as well. Can you imagine going into a place and everyone wants to be diverse and inclusive and equitable? I have to ask, was I looked at primarily or solely for my skills, or did my race come into question? And the latter is the problem that we're facing.
But is that a question that people are asking though? Are people asking have standards be lowered for these for people of color and all that? Are people even trying to understand that, or are they just making judgment calls? Like they're
Of
going
course,
straight to
yeah.
making judgment calls and saying, because I've made a couple of videos on this, and the comments I keep getting, which it's so infuriating when people will tell you that um it's not a good practice when people are hired solely for the color of the skin. And I'm asking, is it possible to hire someone on one criteria that solely
Of course
they say
not.
it's solely like
Of course not.
so
But the problem,
then
the problem is that it's being taken into consideration, Charles. It shouldn't your skin color,
of
even
course
your even
it's
even your social sorry to cut you. It should your social economic background. I don't give two craps about how hard you had it. That should not enter into the conversation, right? Hardship and struggle, I'm sorry, is relative. And this constant hunting for who has had it worse and which group has had it worse. And let's try and, create this cosmic justice and trying to balance, these kind of scales. It's wrong. So whether people are, whether the discussion is, if it's solely based on that or 10% based on that, that should not even be in the conversation.
okay. So I take issues with that for the fact that even competence alone is not the only reason why people are hired. If you go
Fine.
through any job description, there are a host of other qualities that the company might be looking for, right? So why is if you have checked the competency box, right? If you have checked the qualification box, then why is having another criteria like the ethnicity or the race of a person, why does it matter? Why is it so bad? Considering that, okay, there have been systemic issues. These policies were not just drafted out of thin hair, right? There have been systemic issues that were disproportionately affecting certain groups of people, right? And
But
they sort of need, they sort of, okay, do you understand that the environment in which children grow up in affects their development, right? The sort of
yes.
exposure that they are they're given to, right,
Mm-hmm.
affects what they become later on in life. So imagine a community of people that they've always been in a situation when no one has ever been to and higher education. No one has ever had so many experiences, right? it's it will be perpetuating a cycle of underperformance, mediocrity, and all that. Now, supposing there is a program that says, you know what, from these people who are having these issues, let us look for high performing people, and help them to come into this mainstream. Let's help them to come in maybe into schools, right? They come into schools. Of course, some of them will do well, some of them will not do well, right? Those that don't do well, I don't think that people who are admitted into the, let's say Harvard, for example, using affirmative action, that they just simply for the fact that they are higher, that they are passed in their exams, that they just let them graduate. I don't think that's happening. Even from the admission of many right wingers, some of them struggle and they have to drop out. So the fact that you're given that opportunity to even study in the first place, it's not a guarantee that you're going to graduate. And the fact that you are given the opportunity to come into an organization, to work in an organization, is not a guarantee that you're going to be there. It's not a guarantee that after your probation period that the company is going to retain you if you're not competent enough in that job. So looking at it from the angle of, you know what, there were systemic issues that led to this, why a certain group of people are this having this whatever it is, this disadvantage. What can we do? It's easy for us to say, oh, we're individuals in the society, but we're actually not atomized individuals. We're very much affected by our environment, right? So if successive generations of, say, African Americans are put in spaces where they have more opportunities to develop themselves, I think it will have a lot of trickle down effect in their communities, because someone's father has gone to Harvard. They're going to grow up in another cycle that's good in the next generation. Things, and over time it becomes a better world for everyone. I would love to, I would love for skin color not to be a factor in anything. But on the other hand, I understand where it's coming from. I understand where the desire for representation, diversity, and equity and inclusion, I understand where it is coming from. My only quarrel I would have with any DEI initiative is if it is used in hiring incompetent people. People always make this, oh, let the best man get the job. And I keep asking myself, is there a is there ever a best man for the job? Does the best man actually always get the job? Because the interview process is, you know, the interview process, it can tell you who is competent enough for the job, but does it really tell you who is the best for the job? Right? And if the best for the job is hired, it means that there can be only one best for any job whatsoever. There can be only one best for any job whatsoever. So if you have hired the best person for the job, no other person can get hired again, because by that metric they are not the best. But the idea with hiring people is that you want to have people who are competent enough to do the job. So while their competence might vary within a scale of, okay, the top, and but at least to do this job effectively, someone has to have that competent, the basic skills to do the job, which can also be improved upon. Then the second point I will make is, there are people who have gotten jobs not because they are the best, but because of the opportunities open to them. Oh, their father's father knows someone, right? Their uncle knows someone. Someone in their social cycle knows someone. Now, even though those people get those jobs based on recommendations from their social cycle, it doesn't mean that whoever is employing them is not going to also consider whether they are competent or not. So the idea is, when people are rallying against the, oh, it's used to hiring incompetent people, you're considering skin color. I keep asking, is it always the case that people are hired for competence? Is it always the case? There are other times where people are hired for other reasons as well as with competence. Oh, I know your father. I know your uncle. I know something, something. It's not just strictly
Yeah,
competence. We're not ones and zeros, right? So
yeah.
that's well,
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of getting ahead in life, I think, your social capital is probably one of the most important things that one needs to develop, right? Glenn Lowry has spoken in depth about this. And I think that is not talked about as much, and I would even say in the Black community, there's so much focus on you know what what are these external barriers and systems that need to change. And at the end of the day, if you have a strong unit, a network of people who perhaps had it could even be small enterprises, right? Or at least that ethic of not subjecting themselves to victimhood and stuff, it makes a huge difference. And you see this in the differences. And that's why I completely disagree with you about people being subject to this systemic racism in the past, or even some argue presently. That is completely irrelevant when you're now talking about culture, right? When you're now talking about cultural differences. So the US is different, but if you look at in the UK, right? When we had the Windrush generation, and in the 60s and 70s, you had that mass migration from not just the Caribbean but also Africa, right? Many parts of Africa. And they were sort of secluded into these um um pretty much rundown areas in the UK, right? Subject to severe overt racism, right? And not just them, also Indians, people from the Indian community. So let's just take these three groups: Africans, Caribbeans, and I'm talking about not ones that are migrating now. I'm talking about ones that came in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They face the same systemic discrimination, to the point that the political blackness movement was a huge thing in the 60s and 70s here in the UK. You had the Black Sisters of Southall, which was actually founded by South Asian the community, right? So they had a shared struggle of racism, like I said, overt, sometimes legal. And yet, why are we seeing different patterns, right? Today, why are we seeing different outcomes? Why is it that now they're saying that Caribbean girls are more at risk, right, of issues and underperformance and school exclusions? And they're clever though. They always compare it to whites, right? They will say Caribbeans are compared to whites underperforming. Why don't we ever compare to Black Africans, right? Or British Indians?
So,
and this is not me trying to put one group on what I'm trying to argue against your 1 second, I'll finish my point. I'm trying to argue against this idea that systemic racism is a reason for you to now create quotas and try to find which group, and then you have to do this, you know, as I said, cosmic calculation, well, which group suffered like this. And that is not beneficial to actually seeing progress or even helpful for these groups. And who gets to decide that this group has been unjustly discriminated against, so they get, you know, the support and all these free entries and stuff, and another group that may have had, I would say, even the same history, and yet they're thriving today. They're at the top of economic ladders and stuff. So instead of us talking about DEI, why aren't we seeing what these other groups have done successfully? What patterns are different in, you know, their cultural habits, styles, and things like that? And why don't we try and replicate this in other groups that are underachieving, which, surprise, surprise, even includes, you know, lower economic groups of the white group as well? Do you know what I mean? So I think that argument is moot, in my opinion, when you talk about systemic racism.
But I never brought up systemic racism.
You did.
So I don't know what you argue. No.
You did.
No.
You
Let
said.
me explain my point.
Okay, try again.
Let me explain my point. Right. I don't think I'm in disagreement with you with the whole. Of course, different groups have different attitudes. You know, different groups or perform at different rates. That's a given, right? I'm not saying, impute these policies today because of systemic racism today. I am saying.
You didn't say today. You said the past. I'm still arguing against that with the same argument.
Let me finish. I said the past affects the present. And if there are issues in the past, right, that has affected people, that is a carryover today, right? These issues are carryovers today, and we're trying to address it. I'm not saying it's because people are systemically being discriminated against today. Now, I'll play a video shortly, but let me just try and explain my point with an example that John Stewart gave. So I'll play that video, then I'll explain.
Television, even 10 years ago, was not, even if you look around, television, even 10 years ago. Television, even 10 years ago. Television, even 10 years ago, was
so
not,
let me just try
even if you look around now and you go like,
was saying,
pretty diverse workplace. 10 years ago,
there are
not even close to this.
Certain systemic
and
issues
a lot of it
that
was,
happen even
you didn't
without
realize the internships weren't paid.
For example,
so if you weren't already ahead in life, in other words, if your parents weren't already ahead,
right, you couldn't get an internship.
You couldn't afford to take
unpaid
a job for no money
and
live in the city.
Yeah.
And then when the show was hiring, who would they choose from?
Hello?
Yeah.
Am I here all by myself? Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay. So for example, unpaid internships in the industry, in the say the journalism industry, right? Interns before now, interns were not paid, right? So they'll take interns into their profession, and you know, interns will work for a while, and when these companies want to hire, they usually hire from the interns. So while anybody can literally become an intern in any of these companies, right? Anybody can literally become an intern in any of these companies. But if you do not have, if you don't come from a family that can support you while you are doing unpaid work, you literally cannot afford to take an unpaid internship. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say there's, for example, a white family, right, and there's a black family, right. The white family, based on, they've been able to, the wealthy enough because they were not discriminated against as much as the black family who in the past were discriminated against. They're struggling. They couldn't afford to have built that wealth enough for their kid that they've sent to school to afford to take an unpaid internship, right? Now, when they hire from their intern pool. They're not going to, because that black kid cannot afford to take an unpaid internship, that opportunity
Or
of
white
even
kid.
them being discovered or hired in the first place
Or white
is
kid.
is non-existent. Am I breaking up?
Fine.
So is
I can hear you
non-existent
clearly.
in the first place. Wow. So let me try and change my network. Just go ahead. Just keep talking. I'll come back in.
I don't know which point to address. I can still see you. I have such a bad cold.
Hi, Ada. Can you hear me now?
Hi, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So my network is acting up, right? So the point I was driving at is, even without being deliberately discriminatory, just the socioeconomic background that these two people are coming from, the different socioeconomic background they are coming from, is enough to shape their outcomes in life, to shape their
I
career
disagree.
paths.
I
So
disagree.
supposing um the radio station or the TV station says, you know what, we want to encourage people from such and such socioeconomic background. We want to have certain quotas for them, and we're going to be paying interns. We'll bring them in, but they have to be competent enough to do the job, right? They have to be the criteria is they have to be competent enough, and they have to also check the other criteria. What's so bad in that? Because this is a person who could have gotten that job, but their socioeconomic condition is preventing them from getting that job because they can't afford to take an unpaid internship. So these policies, they're not perfect, but they are they are ways of trying to remedy um, some past systemic issues. And I don't think that the past does not affect the present. The past does affect the present. It's just to what extent do we implement some of these things, right? So I have a sense that there's a lot of straw manning of whatever DEI is, right? There's a lot of, oh, it's just used to employ incompetent people. And I'm like, I don't really
But
see that. I can see the discrimination angle, but it's not for no reason that the quote unquote discrimination is there.
okay, but this is what I was trying to explain to you. And you mentioned this is not what you were talking about. That's what I was talking about. Yes, systemic racism or discrimination or injustice or unfairness or brutality has happened. But why has one group come out of that, for example, and another one needs this, push from society or the government or institution in order to succeed in life? Because I don't, you keep shaking your head, but I don't so you're saying that a black kid from his environment is, hold on, because let me try and understand it then, because obviously I think I'm answering your question. You keep saying no, because you're saying the past has affected the future. So there's a past that has affected three groups in the same way. Why is one group not able to come out from that cloud of historical injustice, is what I'm saying, and another hasn't? Can you understand this question? It's quite a simple.
I understand your question, but
we're not talking past each other.
The point is, so Ada, the point is, even if you have 10 people of the same racial makeup, their experiences, their level of development, whatever, it's always going to be different. It's always going to be disparate for multiple reasons, right?
Exactly.
It's never going to be equal. It's always going to be disparate. So whether or not you're saying, oh, why isn't this group developing as fast as the other group, who was also discriminated against, is like saying, why isn't...
No, I'm saying, why is DEI needed for one group? Because they faced
every human being.
I'm gonna leave this point now, because I think I'm answering your question very well. Because at the end of the day, systemic injustice or unfairness is not reason to implement these forced, shall I say, quotas and these DEI initiatives. And in my opinion, it is actually unfair when you pick and choose which group you want these initiatives to work for. Just going off topic a little bit, but if you take because I was talking about this the other day, if you take the entertainment industry, and there's this constant push for Black actors to be rewritten into originally white roles. And I'm thinking to myself, and it's all in the name of representation, and there's not enough representation and so on, which is a fallacy, because actually, if we look at the numbers, Black people are actually overrepresented in the media. If we want to do this equal, splits between population and, their spaces in this industry, right? But it always seems to be a push for Black people to receive more of these roles, and Black people so what about other groups that perhaps are not as represented and things like that? So I just think there are a lot of inconsistencies in this. And I don't get your argument that because, the environment shapes you, then that means that you're not able to actually mimic or at least follow or learn from, the successes of people who were in the same socioeconomic position as you. There is a person in the UK called Reggie Nelson, from a lower economic background, socioeconomic background. He didn't need an initiative or, a DEI policy to help him. Do you know what he did? He knocked on doors, his own initiative. And this is why I'm against DEI, because it takes away that agency by saying that because of your environment, because of, the past, then this is why you need this extra push. And that extra push comes from within that person. Actually, that's the conversations we should be having. So he knocked on doors, right? He thought of this himself. And a long story short, after talking to random stockbrokers in East London, or Central London, shall I say, today he's pretty much nearly a millionaire, if he's not a millionaire. So these are the things that we need to be driving to people, in my opinion. And DEI does exactly the opposite.
Okay, so about the Black actors thing, rewriting scripts to fit Black actors, I think that's just absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense to me. they can create more characters for black
But they're
actors.
competent. They're competent
No,
actors.
that's not that's ridiculous, because you already have a role, right? And if you wanted to create more roles for black actors, you can write scripts that fits them. So that's a separate point.
No,
Now,
I said it was off
so,
topic, but I was trying to
okay,
emphasize that these
okay.
initiatives are
So the
unhelpful.
last point you were making is more like the bootstrap analogy, right? And I don't buy that analogy, because not everybody can actually pull themselves up. It's not possible. That's why we're different human beings. For the fact that someone who came from an obscure background was able to do that doesn't mean everyone who came from an obscure background can do that without some sort of help. That's why we are human beings. Even the guy you say came from an obscure background, yes, he did not do all that all on his own. He also did it on the goodwill of other people. Those people could very well have refused the aid that he gave to him. Those who gave him those opportunities that he went knocking for could have refused those opportunities to him, and he would have he would have ended just as poor. And there are some people who grew up in affluent backgrounds as well, that have not taken advantage of the opportunities present to them. So this idea that, oh, everybody can. No, not everybody can, for many reasons, right? Many people need some sort of help. But I am saying, this help you're giving to this person, is this person unable to be productive with this help? Is this person so incapacitated that giving them that little
Sorry,
help?
Charles. I've just looked at the chat. I'm happy to come on your show, but if people are, doing abusive comments to me, I think if you can see some
Who is that?
comments.
Who
I don't
specifically?
appreciate abuse. I can understand criticism, but if
I have
people
not
are
been looking at
saying
the
I'm
chat. I'm
chatting,
so sorry. So
either
sorry
it's
about that.
moderated or maybe I mean, I'm giving up my time here. So I think there's
Please, guys, please. I don't want any sort of insults to my guests. Please, it is not acceptable. If I see any of such again, I'm going to ban the person from this channel. Please. I wasn't looking at the chat because I didn't want it to distract the conversation. So I'm very sorry
yeah,
about
just
that,
clicked
Ella.
on it. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea that anybody can is a myth, right? People have different capacities. There are different things that line up for why someone can become something. I I get what you're trying to say. I think that you have a better chance of bettering your lot if you tried in the first place. But simply trying is not enough for everybody. Simply trying on your own by the force of will is not enough for everybody to make it. Some are going to by force of will, many are not going to. So for every one example that you give of someone who was exceptional, who came out from an extraordinary situation to become this great person, you're going to find 1,000 examples of people who tried something similar and nothing came out of it. So what happened to them? Is it because they didn't try hard enough? It's just because so many other factors did not align in their favor for them to be able to get that same result. It goes
But
back to
that's
the
not the
idea that
fault. That's not the fault of society or the government to fix.
so I'm not saying it's the fault of anyone, right? It's not
Or the
a question of,
responsibility.
well, it's the responsibility of government to fix societal issues. It's the responsibility of, that's why you have government to fix societal issues. If you have people who are struggling in a country and you have a government that is responsible, it's the responsibility of government to, what can we do about this idea that, oh, the government just folds its arms and everybody just, even in a family, you can't say in a family is the responsibility of everybody to take care of themselves. No, the family takes care of everybody. There are
And
some people in the family that might need more help than others. For example, there are some children that might need more time, more tutoring from their parents to be able to learn, right? So as a parent, you have two children. You know that they are learning at two different rates. Are you going to use the same approach for your kids? Because, well, this is the way I'm going to do it. If you can't keep up, then it's no fault of mine. No, you are going to say, you know what? How do we help this kid that is struggling? What can I do separately? What can I do differently to help this kid. I am totally against the idea of the outcome being, this. I am for the process of how do we give people more opportunities so that we get to that outcome.
I
I
don't
am
think
for the
anyone is
opportunity.
arguing about that.
No, I
The
think a lot of
problem, but
people are
no,
arguing about
okay,
that,
then I'm
against it.
not, and I'm not going to argue
And
for
I'm going to
argument's
give you
sake.
an
But
example
I,
of why I think people are arguing against that, right? So, part of the uproar is a comment that the United CEO made in 2021, right? I will see if this video can play this time, right? There's been a lot of right wingers who have made videos about it, and they're saying, oh, he wants to hire 50% women, he wants to hire 50% people of color, and all that.
Scott, what
right?
is the United Aviate Academy?
Aviate Academy is really about training the next generation of pilots. Down the road, there probably is going to be a pilot shortage here in the United States.
Why do you expect that?
The military produces far fewer pilots today than they did, in the Vietnam and Cold War era, and it's hard to become a pilot, a commercial airline pilot, on your own if you're not going through the military.
How is diversity and diversity targets working into the Aviate Academy?
We have committed that 50% of the classes will be women or people of color. Today, only 19% of our pilots at United Airlines are women or people of color. And by the way, from all the data I've seen, that's the highest of any airline in the country.
Okay, so that was the comment made by the United CEO, airline CEO in 2021, right? And okay, maybe, do you want to play that again? I would just like your thoughts, what you think about what he said. Do you want me to play it again?
Unfortunately, I actually have to go.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's almost
Sorry.
time. Can you give me 3 minutes? 3 minutes so that we
Yeah,
conclude this.
that's fine.
3 minutes. Okay. So essentially what that guy said was that, that it's very difficult for people to become pilots, commercial pilots, and because it's mostly people go to the military to acquire such skills, and with the military not training enough pilots, he foresaw that there will be shortages of pilots in the future, right? So in commitment to the DEI policies, they said, okay, we have an academy that trains pilots, that trains people to become competent in flying airplanes. And we want 50% of that class to be women of color. Now, you can say that is discriminatory, right? But what he didn't say is, I'm going to hire 50% women of color. Rather, he said, I'm going to give 50% opportunities for women of color to learn how to fly airplanes, classes. This was taken as an example. This was taken as, you can go on YouTube and search the videos that are reacting to this particular video. So I ask myself, what do you have against people having skills? What do you have against people acquiring skills to become competent to fly airplanes? I mean, for the fact that they have gone into that class does not mean that they're going to graduate. It does not mean that they're automatically going to be pilots, right? They're just being given the opportunity to learn that skill. But yet people are interpreting it as, oh, he's just hiring incompetent people. So this is the kind of straw manning I see with this kind of conversation. And I'm like, are these people serious? If you give me a real example of incompetent hiring, I'm going to be with you 100%. But for God's sake, don't strawman something just because you don't like it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't think there's any issues with allowing people to acquire skills or anything. I think some people's concerns is putting race and racial identity at the forefront of these initiatives, regardless of the historical or present day disparities that there are. That's literally people's arguments, right? So, whether people who may have not had, the opportunity, that's a different conversation. But I think constantly making it about race is what people rightly, don't like.
All right, Ada, thank you very, very much. I know you are committed to 1 hour, and it's exactly 1 hour. I am really, really glad to be having this conversation with you. I'm sure we'll pick up the conversation or some other conversations sometime soon again, but you have to go, and I really want to appreciate your. Please don't be offended by the main comments in the
I don't
section.
think it's
This is YouTube,
offensive, but
and
I
you're always going to
think
get.
definitely when it's like, if it's my channel, I definitely would make sure that, it's maybe perhaps you don't have the capacity, but make sure it's well moderated so that people's guests aren't, receiving
Okay.
unnecessary, because obviously it's their time and that they're taking.
Yeah, I probably will institute a moderator. I don't have a moderator, and I didn't want to be distracted by a comment section, so I wasn't just looking at it anyway. So I think that's something to improve upon. So thank you very much, Ada. We'll see you some other time. It's bye for now. So back to so let me just put the link. Those who want to call in, let's have a conversation. Please, guys, I don't appreciate certain comments to my guests, and I'm going to take serious actions on it. Right. All right. So the link is in the description. If you want to call in, you can call in. Let's have the conversation. Right. My whole issue with the way the DEI is being portrayed, right, is portrayed as, oh, it's a way of hiring incompetent people, and I'm struggling to see the evidence for that. I'm struggling. I will and I can admit that it's discriminatory, but also it's not discriminatory for no reason. There is a reason why it's discriminatory, right? There's a history behind it, and you'll be putting your hand in the sand thinking that the past doesn't affect the present, or that the present doesn't affect the future. I mean, life is a continuum, right? While we cannot get stuck in the past, right, I think that any responsible government or any responsible society would constantly look for ways to improve the lot of people within that society. And they're not just going to let people rot because, you know what, it's not my fault. Every man for themselves. Hi, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. You caught me on a day where I wasn't doing anything, so I was able to actually join in.
It's good to have you.
Yeah, sorry I've been so vague, like just not here. Just been busy. Yeah. Sorry everybody. I haven't been too active. I've just been focused on my new career and my family, because I spent so much time at school and 3 nights a week, and I didn't get to see my wife very much, and so I'm just kind of like focusing on my home life. So yeah, interesting conversation. I got most of it. I had to skip out a couple of times, but I think I want to give Ada a little bit of grace here and say that her points aren't misguided. I think she's approaching it from a very optimistic perspective, as well as a perspective of, if I could put words in her mouth, I'd say no one needs to help you. There's no requirement that someone needs to help you up, and you have to do the work. But also on the other side of that, we do know that disparities and discrimination does happen. It does occur, and we do have to have a conversation about how to diminish those. So I don't think that either of your guys' points are really that far off of the truth. My big question is, with the airplane, the airline or the school, whatever it is the problem I have with DEI is it band-aids something without actually paying attention to what the problem is. And the problem is why wasn't there 50% represented people from underrepresented communities already in the classes? That's where you have to start. Like, what's going on? Why do we not have that 50% that we claim that we want to have? Right? Is it financial issues? Is it time scheduling? Like, what is it? Do we have actual racist practices in place? And so when people say that they, disagree with it, my first go-to is, okay, well, what's the original problem you're trying to solve, and are you solving it, or are you just putting a Band-Aid on it? That's kind of where I'm coming from.
So my question to you, Steve, would be, if, for example, the United Airlines has found out some of the reasons why there are not that much women of color, right? Maybe it's financial issues, maybe it's some other things. What exactly do you think they can do about that? What do you think the United CEO can do about, those other factors? I mean, they are not
Well,
the government, they are not politicians. What do you think they
right.
can do?
You can bring in advisors and specialists to kind of go through your procedures and your policies and say, hey, is there something here that is creating a differential between what you say that your goal is and what is actually happening? So you can say, I don't know any examples because that's not my industry necessarily. My experience in aerospace is somewhere completely different from that, but I would bring in specialists, advisors that can go through the policies and make sure that there's nothing there. And on top of that, you can change things up. You can advertise to specific markets. Say that you've got, say that you want to hit that 50% of underrepresented people. Well, you go out there and you make an advertising campaign saying, "Hey, come fly with us. Learn how to fly." You know what I mean? There's a ton of ways to do that without having to enforce some kind of affirmative action, although I'm not entirely against affirmative action either. I'm just saying, I think there's a broader spectrum of things that we can discuss when we're actually talking about solving the problem rather than band-aiding a problem.
So when you say band-aiding, do you think that saying, okay, getting 50%, I mean, those 50% women that women of color that they want to teach how to fly, there are people who are interested in learning to fly to begin with. So
Right.
is it possible that they've actually put out that campaign and say, you know what, come fly with us? And from the pool of people that have come, if the class is only able to take 100 people, because most of the time you have more people who are qualified for a job or willing to do the job more than there are jobs available, right? So you have to sort of you have to make some selection, right? So what if they've done that? They've put out the ads and then they have 200 people show up, right? They have 200 people show up. And part of their goal is we want to have more women of color learning how to fly planes. So what's bad in them selecting 50% of those women of color that they've advertised for? Like, they didn't force them that you have to come. They advertised, those guys came and say, we want to teach you how to learn how to fly planes. How is that a band-aid?
So the band-aid, what I'm talking about is if you didn't have if you didn't bring in specialists and advisors to come in and look at your policies, then that would be a band-aid, right? You have to deal and you have to treat with the injury itself first, which is the racism that might be an issue. So it's kind of like the civil rights era, in my opinion, was amazing. It was groundbreaking. It's one of the most amazing movements this country has ever seen. And we started creating policies to address certain disparities. But what we didn't do is we didn't deal with the underlying racist tonality of our country. So that's a band-aid. We're putting something over something to hide it, hoping that it heals. And we're surprised when it doesn't. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I'm talking about band-aids.
So Stanley, sorry, before you go,
is
Stanley,
absolutely right.
Stanley, 1 minute before you go. Yes, but my question still comes back to how are we sure that United CEO did not bring in advisors, right, to check their policies and whatever. Number two, even if they didn't do that, what can they do about the racism in society? I mean, the CEO only has control over his company. He has no control over what happens in the wider society. He has no control over what the government decides to do. He has no control over whether people choose to be racist or not. He only has control over his company, right?
I
Stanley,
hate to evoke Jordan Peterson, but tend to your own shit first.
Yes.
Okay, so if his scope of control is only American Airlines, you start there. You instead of setting an example, you be an example. You walk the walk, you talk the talk, and you do what you say you're going to do. And I think
Which is
that's
exactly what
a
he's done.
broader spectrum of what I think needs to happen.
Okay. But
Now may I go?
when you say walk the walk, what exactly do you mean specifically? Sorry, Stanley, just for more minutes. What exactly do you think? What exactly do you think United CEO could have done?
So, well, I've already made the example. I mean, if you say that you want a larger representation by underrepresented people, you have to go through your policies. You have to start advertising. You actually have to start paying attention and doing what work is necessary to try and get those people in the door, right? You can't just be like, yeah, we want 50% and then not do jack shit about it, right? You've got to do something to address the reasons, hopefully address the reasons why those people didn't feel like they wanted to learn how to fly. You know what I mean? So there's a tons of ways. I mean, again, it's not my specialty. It's not my field. I don't know a whole lot about that side of aerospace. So it's a little bit different for me, but if it was for me, it would be like, okay, well, what are our hiring practices? What, is this a field that we feel is going unnoticed in underrepresented communities? You can poll, you can do studies, you can bring in advisors. There's a plethora of things that you can do that is part of the work, and then adjusting according.
Thank you, Steve. So Stanley, quickly go so that we can take SKC.
I'm going to go to slightly right, to the right of Steve. If a company makes a good faith effort to find 100 Black women flyers and they get 50, go with it. Train the people that want to do it. Does that make sense? Maybe you
Makes
don't
sense
get
to me.
100, but
Yeah.
but you made a. No one can ask a company if you make an actual good faith effort, you get what you get, and you might get 50 good flyers, you might get 25, but you made the effort. And my point is, America doesn't do that to a large extent, in just my opinion. However, to Charlie Kirk's point, if I see a Black pilot on an American Airlines or Delta flight, you know what? I'm more comfortable because that Black pilot went through a bunch of stuff to become captain of that airplane. He worked harder, just like his parents told him to. So I'll
Can I point out something
there.
interesting?
What's that?
So Charlie Kirk, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I can't stand Charlie Kirk in the first place. But what I think he didn't realize, that he is so against people like Robin DiAngelo. And in her book, White Fragility, she makes an example of when she went into the school and she was shocked that there was a Black principal. Right.
Well, Robin DiAngelo is not the
certainly
sharpest
not
tool in the
lost on
shed.
Charlie Kirk when he walks into an aircraft. Like, holy cow, there's a Black pilot. I better go. Dude, you just ignored all of the steps that person had to go through. It's like commercial airline pilots have to have tens of thousands of hours under their belt before they can actually pilot they have to spend time as a co-pilot, then they have to go, there's just constant training. I know that much because I had a friend that did work in the industry. It's kind of like the principal. He still had to go through school. He had to do the work.
Like a naval aviator, and he just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, and I want to reemphasize the point. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
But again, I would be more confident because in the America we live in, even in 2023, the last thing a horribly competent Black person wants to do is prove the stereotype that Charlie Kirk bases his show on. I'm going to be hyper confident, and I've been through this.
All right. I have several friends
You
who
will
are
be the
racialized
best
as black.
naval officer on the ship.
Yeah. I mean, I have several friends that are racialized as black, and they work their asses off, because I
Not
mean,
to
part of it
fail.
is just because they have a really great work ethic, but they understand what the perception is or what it possibly could be, and they're
100%.
not going to allow someone to come in there and be like,
100%.
oh, well, they're black, they're just kind of coasting through.
100%.
They're not going to do that.
100%.
And to your point with, if they want 50, if they want 100 individuals who are people of color or whatever you want to call them, underrepresented communities, let's say you're shooting for 100 out of 200, but you only get 50, but you only had 5 before that. You still had a tenfold increase in the people that are coming to your class, into your school. That's still massive. That's still amazing.
Yeah.
It's shoot for the stars, you hit the moon, and
And
you're
that's
still
DEI
doing a pretty
in
good
the
job.
best sense of it. Now, just like CRT, it gets polluted by the
Yeah.
Charlie Kirks of the world. And
All right, let's let SKC get a word in.
Yeah, I think DI is a bunch of bull.
Yeah,
Just straight up,
that's a statement.
it's a bunch of bull. If people want to go on the, I guess the whole Charlie Kirk angle of it and think that that's the lion's share of the argument, it's like, hey, you can do that, but the I think that the main portion of the DEI thing is that you can't have diversity and meritocracy at the same time. Not the way that they're stating it. It's just not going to happen. And one of the major issues that I have with DEI programs that attach themselves, particularly to the business world, education institutions, that's a whole nother animal, but particularly to the business world, when you're attaching yourself to a business, you're supposed to help that business to make money. There is no DEI program that can show, hey, we can show key performance indicators that prove that what we're doing helps your bottom line. Because if they were able to do it, they would have shown it by now, but they can't. Which is why you have a lot of businesses that as soon as anything happens, what is the first department that they cut? DEI, because they know that it's waste. They can operate without it and be just fine. So the idea of a company having to have to come in and fix social issues, that's weird. And it's backwards.
well, let me ask.
If I could finish, Stanley, it's when I think his name was Steve, when he stated trying to understand why certain people don't enter into certain occupations. That's not for a business to figure out. That's culture. That should be figured out from a parental or guardian type of thing. It has nothing to do with the company themselves, particularly in the time in which we're living now, where everybody is walking around with a mini computer in their hands.
Oh. Can I ask you a question, SKC?
So before we go, Stanley, I must really register my displeasure with your comments to Ada. I don't appreciate such comments to my guests. So please, it shouldn't happen again, please. And she didn't take kindly to it. And I've been going through the comments now. You don't have to make sarcastic comments. You don't have to do that. If you want to,
I will curb my
if you want,
sarcasm. Understood.
please.
I
It's not.
apologize. I apologize to Hannah. Should I go on?
Go on.
Well, no. I apologize. I did not mean to hurt her feelings.
It's you didn't hurt her feelings, you were disrespectful to her. Those are two different things.
Understood.
Another part of the whole DEI thing that gets weird is, take for instance when people were talking about how does it affect and all of that stuff. Okay. Yes, you may get some, let's say if you go into the let's say what's that? Flying, airports, all that other stuff, or even get into the medical field or something like that. Okay, it's not just now we have new people in that may be talented and so forth. The other part of the DEI programs that people don't want to talk about is the negative aspect of having people go through some sort of anti-racial training that has nothing to do with their job whatsoever. It's like you come in with the claim that this is a racialized place without proving it first.
Can I ask you a question? Is anti-racial training the equivalent of not being a racist? That's for you, SKC.
I don't understand the point of the question.
I bet you didn't.
Do you have to take a?
No, I'm being sarcastic. I'm sorry. I'm hurting your feelings too. I'll mute.
Has nothing to do with that. I just don't. Just as I don't think that people should have to take anti-racist training, just like I don't think people should have to take anti-pedophilic training. You don't go into a company with the idea of
pedophilia and racism are kind of the same, right?
Stanley, you've got to let people finish. SKC, go on.
Yeah, people are jumping into situations with an assumption that something is without proving it. I totally understand if somebody, let's say if somebody, I could totally understand if there was some situation where the company popped up and they had an issue to where there were some women that had been abused some way sexually. And then they said, you know what, we're going to take some time out and we're going to put in and hire in, I don't know, like a Sigma 6 person or something that's going to come through and talk about how we can watch out for this further and blah, blah, blah. I get that. But you don't day one say that in order for you to be onboarded, you have to take, this XXX abuse thing every 3 or 4 months. It's like, come on, that's ridiculous.
Okay, so SKC, let me ask you this question. I quite agree with the other parts of the comments that you made. Forcing people to go through insane anti-racist classes and all that makes no sense, right? But what I want to know is DEI used in hiring incompetent people? That's what I just want to know. And if what's the evidence for whatever position you're taking?
I take the opposite approach. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think you would have to build a metric on what that competency was. Like, is the competency that you're looking for a group that improves the work area, the work environment, the culture of that workplace? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I think it would be difficult to try and calculate that level. Well, wow, I can't talk today. I think it would be difficult to determine the competency of someone based on their experiences, because that's what DEI is. It's based on people's experiences. And even though I'm like 80%, 90% against DEI, I still can recognize areas where it did really, really good. And one of those is helping people who might have felt uncomfortable going into a career now feeling a little bit more comfortable, knowing that there's at least some kind of representation of their experiences, right? Obviously, these experiences aren't going to be wholesale, monoliths, and everybody's going to have different experiences. But I think making the effort does actually matter a little bit. That's kind of where I would go at. I'm sorry if that was rambling.
No, and in addition to that, what I would add, Charles, is this: is like when you bring forth the question and say, "Well, prove to us that this is causing a hiring of incompetent people," right? Well, I think it's putting the cart before the horse, because DEI programs are not the company. They attach themselves to the company. So it is contingent upon them to first prove that they are an asset to the company first. So instead of getting into this whole idea about whether or not this causes incompetent people to be hired, it's like, no, first you need to show me how you help my bottom line. I'm a business.
Okay.
I can see where SKC's coming from. I guess my only challenge to that really is this a problem where you don't know you have a problem and you're trying to resolve that by being more forward thinking and planning ahead, or are we trying to play catch up? If we're trying to play catch up, then that's a problem. Especially as a business, playing catch up is one of the worst things you can do for your bottom line. It's more advantageous to get ahead of the curve than it is to try and swim against a current. I guess that's my only challenge, really, at least right now.
And I would say this for the DEI people and all that other stuff. I would say, okay, basically you're coming to me and you're saying that you want me to be a charity, because you want me to help out disadvantaged people in order to be able to succeed in this industry. Well, fine. Let me do that at the middle school and high school level with some sort of apprenticeship. I can do it from there, because now I know and can test whether or not the individuals that flow through this program that I put forth are actually competent. And I'm heading it off at the level of which you should actually be fixing the issue.
So these policies that you want to do at middle school, would it be specifically targeting Black people or people of color?
You could just call it an inner city outreach program. If you want little pilots, fine. There you go.
Your intent is to bring in more people of color, or just to bring in more people? What exactly is the intent? Why are you going to the inner cities?
Well, the intent would be in order to help individuals who perhaps do not, who have not been, who have not known about such an industry and how they can be involved in it, to be able to be involved. But they would need to understand at some point that will require some of their other habits to die off.
So don't you think that why don't you simply just implement a nationwide policy? Why restrict it to the inner cities? Why?
Well, what I'm stating is I was stating in the concept of, if the DEI people wanted to come to me and state, okay, you need DEI in your company and such and such and such and such, my counter would be, no, let me just do this at the middle school and high school level so that I can work with people and see their progression from that time on up.
So I'd like to kind of agree with SKC on this.
I know, but aren't you just pushing the same policy just a little bit further down? I mean, is it really DEI if you're not targeting specific groups, right? If you're just doing it for everybody, and if you're targeting specific groups, isn't it really the same thing? You're just pushing it down like it's an infinite regression sort of thing. You could push it back
No,
further down, but you're still selecting people based on certain criteria, which also correlates with skin color at times and race.
well, what I'm saying is this, and I think Steve wanted to add to this in a little bit or give his point of view.
Yeah.
But I think that this would be across the board. You could even incorporate this in terms of the schools, so far as like colleges, the Ivy Leagues on down. If they really wanted the percentages that they sought out, then they would get involved in getting programs in schools all over the United States. They have the money to do it. Really letting these kids know that you have an opportunity to be able to get here, and some of the impact of what they're learning and how it will impact them in the future, giving them a different voice than from what they're getting inside of their homes. If they really wanted to do that, they could do it. But what it seems to be now is that people are trying to say, oh, you know what? There's nothing wrong going on culturally or familial wise or any of that stuff. You just don't want to pick these people because you're racist, and that's not the case.
So
Yeah,
I want to.
those are different arguments. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with SKC on this. Is something that just kind of popped into my head when he was talking was, why is the DEI industry so heavily focused on business and corporations and such? Why do we not see more movement below that, meaning education, higher education, middle school education? Why are we not? Because to me, I'm talking to a couple of friends of mine that have been, from inner cities. A lot of the youth feel like that stuff's unattainable. It's like, you're never going to make it, and this is a common phrase uttered in those in environments. It's like, why would you want to do that? And why would you want to make the effort? You're never going to be able to achieve that. So going into those spaces and be like, no, you can achieve this. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we can help guide you. We're going to provide a roadmap. We're going to be there along the entire way, and we're going to help you get into these businesses. We're going to help build that competency, because competency isn't just a stagnant linear curve, right? So this is something that competency can be taught. Competency can be learned, and it can be, that's building competency is what college is for, right? You're building competency in an area that you weren't aware of or you didn't know enough about beforehand. So you go to school to learn more about it. So competency to me is a tricky thing for me, because how do you judge that? Well, you have filter systems, you have tests, pilots have hours that they have to fly. There's a whole slew of filters that we can use. So competency isn't necessarily, I think, the strongest argument here. I think the strongest argument is, how can we help people feel like they can go into these fields, be successful, thereby creating a desire and a want for them to be there in the first place. Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself well enough?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does make sense. But the other point I will make is, which is not your point, which is the point of other people, right? Who have said, United CEO, or the guy is hiring incompetent people there and all that stuff. But his whole point from that clip I showed was actually trying to help people to gain competence, right? Which is akin to what you're saying, which is akin to what SKC was saying, or why don't you go to the schools? The guy literally has a school of his own and is trying to help these people. So what exactly is the problem with him trying to help people to gain those skills? Because he could as well have done it at the secondary school level, or at the college level, or at K to 12 level, or whatever. School is still school. The flying classes are still school, right? He's trying to help people gain competence.
I think the major difference comes in when when you add in the full package of DEI, you're trying to tell the company what to do in order to in order to reach that goal. And the DEI departments aren't focused in on how what they are implementing, how it affects bottom line, because they're more focused in on trying to make things look good from a certain aesthetic. But if you were to put that in the hands of the company itself, and they put it in at grade school, middle school, high school, they know what's best for their bottom line the entire time. I think that's one of the big.
Any evidence? Do you
Yeah, I'm
have
not confident
any
of that
evidence for
entirely.
the fact that they don't care about the bottom line? They don't care about any other thing. The DEI people, they only care about diversity. Is there any evidence for that?
One of the arguments that I hear a lot from DEI heads and departments that are having issues is that they often claim that they are not getting enough resources, or that the upper heads are just not following the instruction of what they want. And again, if these departments were so valuable to the companies, then why are they first to go whenever something happens?
Well, I wasn't aware that they were. I'd have to look that up and research it. But I'm not saying you're not telling the truth. I can't confirm or do anything based off of that statement, because I'd have to look into it. But let's assume that you're right. Honestly, I don't know what to say about that. I think that would suck if that was the case. But you may be right, where it's a place where they can cut costs and it doesn't really seriously affect the bottom line of the company. I mean, it's a rational argument to make. I'm just not sure of the validity of it yet.
Yeah, when we saw the largest part of that during the tech cuts that took place, those were the first departments to go en masse. And then we also saw it within the journalism field. A lot of the individuals who were of that ilk were the first to go.
Well, is it because they weren't doing their job, or was it because they weren't needed anymore, or was it because of some other reason that we're not aware of?
They're not profitable.
Well, of course they're not profitable, but I work in aerospace, and the division that I work for specifically is federally required to be there. It's not profitable. We cost the company money, but we're required to be there by federal law. So there's areas that aren't, that's a protection that I have in my industry, in what I do. But yeah, I just don't know. I'd have to look up some studies and see how accurate your argument is.
Yeah, I think that's some of the reason why you had individuals like Ibram X. Kendi that wanted to make certain departments within the government that would make like things like anti-racist training to be a federal mandate, so that they didn't have to prove profitability. They would just need to be there.
Yeah. Ugh. That I think there's a lot of people out there that could do not just a marginally better job, but a massively better job of DEI by, Dr. Sheena Mason comes to mind. I think she could do a drastically better version of anti-racism than any of these DEI companies possibly could. And I think she would be profitable. I think her systems would be profitable for businesses, because it would bring in better talent. I think it would bring in new talent, not better talent, but it would bring in talent that could possibly even increase the business's abilities. That's my own personal opinion. I'm biased towards Dr. Mason. So
no, I do think that there are. Oh, I'm sorry. I do think that there are some caveats where you do have people that are actually trying to implement things the correct way, and they are trying to create some social change that would be beneficial. But I think when you look at the overall picture, when you have people like, take for instance, like Ibram X. Kendi, who had a program at Boston College, where he basically drained $54 million in over 4 years with no research to show. I mean, absolutely nothing to show to date. And then to have his books and different programs that he has, or different writings that he has proposed to be within the DEI literature of various companies to read, and as a placeholder of what you should and shouldn't do, when you can see that the person tried to put forth a program that had tens of millions of dollars behind it and it produced nothing.
What exactly was Candy's program supposed to produce? What exactly do you think it was supposed to produce?
It was actually supposed to produce the numbers on racism in America and in business. And he was supposed
to create new policies and to create new policies. Not one lick of research, not one lick of no study, no results whatsoever. 4 years. That's a money pit.
So maybe this is coming way late in the conversation, but I'd like to get everybody's definition of DEI, and I think I asked that earlier, and how your understanding of how it's being implemented. So we can go with Steve. Oh, Bandit is here. Let's hear Bandit first. Bandit, just start with that question. How do you what's your understanding of DEI and how you feel it's been implemented?
Well, depends on the level of employee. So my definition of is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a set of rules set by investment companies to basically extort businesses to fund them for actual future lending. It's set up by Larry Fink at BlackRock and other corporations to control who gets to be part of the upper management of a company. Because all this was started for funding under the ESG rules. And all that's because of different ways of setting up funds. Because you can have exclusionary funds for businesses, and then if you don't want to be on that exclusionary fund list for ETFs and whatever, you need to be part of we're going to have this diversity inclusion, so you have to be part of these organizations. It's basically an accreditation. I need to hire X number of employees of X gender, race, in order to meet a certain limit, so then I get accredited as a DEI corporation so I can get funding. That's how I see it.
Okay. SKC, let's hear your thoughts on that then, Steve.
I think that's the major issue, Charles, is that when you go from place to place, and when you talk to the individuals that are involved, they all have different definitions. And even if they give you a certain definition, they don't implement it the way that it's defined, because a lot of the people that take on those positions are actually activists. It's the same thing with CRT. You have certain people who they make a claim of, oh, this is only taught at the university level, but you're taking elements of it and you're teaching it at the K through 12 level and embedding it into these theories into curriculum.
Okay. Steve.
So the question is how do I define DEI?
Yeah.
Well, I think originally it was well intended to seek out and to eliminate discrimination, to create better outcomes, both in society and in business, and to help provide more inclusive spaces for people who may have felt that they were not included previously. Part of critical race theory too was, and your motto is question everything. And the progenitors of DEI, which is critical race theory, they did just that. They questioned the meritocracy. They questioned whether it was adequate and whether it was actually being implemented and was truthful. They question the way that we live as a society, and I think all of those benefit us in some ways, because the answer doesn't always have to be yes or no. It's sometimes just having the conversation is enough to learn more than we had before to help improve situations in society. I think I'm in agreement with Stanley on this. I think it got abused. I think it got co-opted by people who had nefarious intents. And I think there's a lot of argument there for the fact that it is bleeding into certain aspects of our society that are not having great benefits. They're actually very negative benefits. It seeped its way into schools. Even my son's school, they've got SEL there, and not the good kind, because there's two different kinds. There's a good kind and a bad kind. But for example, some of the things that you would take as possibly critical race theory, like intersectionality, what you're seeing is the more that is implemented, the worse testing scores are for boys. Like, it's been pretty much like going downhill since these policies were enacted. So I think in a lot of areas, I guess the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think it was intended to be a remarkable system where we could question and investigate society and the horrible things that come with that, like racism and sexism and all those things. However, again, I think it got co-opted into something that it shouldn't have been, and it should have been focused on other areas rather than political overturning of a country. That's what I would define it as much grace as I can possibly give it.
Thank you. So this question will go to Bandit, right? Bandit, I want to understand how DEI contributes to hiring incompetent people, because that's really the place I'm most interested in. The other stuff, right? I can agree with every other thing we've said, right? My major issue is when people claim, oh, it's being used to hire incompetent people. I just want to know, what's the evidence for that specific claim? Most of the time, people they might not understand what I'm driving at, but that is exactly what I'm driving at.
Hey, Bandit, put yourself on mute if you would.
Yeah, I was going to answer his question real quick. I'm sorry, I'm in my car. It's in a way, you have to look at it as an opportunity cost. Okay, so if I have candidate A and candidate B, okay, candidate A is, we'll just say, a DEI candidate, and candidate B is anti-DEI candidate. Okay, if I have to have a limit of X number of DEI employees at my company, I have to forego, aka opportunity cost, of letting a person that I would like to hire, but I can't due to a regulation. So it's hard to measure what you're foregoing instead of what you have. So I can have 2 competent people, or I can have 2 non-competent people, but the opportunity cost that I have to pick someone because of DEI over someone that's not DEI, and then say that person goes to a competitor and then they kick my ass. Like, how you can't really measure that other than one company does better than another, assuming everything is equal. And that's why it's hard to measure.
It's socially engineering failure is what I'm hearing from you.
Correct.
Yeah. I think
so.
Where I would come into this, Charles.
Let me take this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the competency thing is a little bit disingenuous from my position, where I would be arguing for DEI. In this case, would be it's giving more access to those who are competent, and had the negative effect of the exact opposite of. I don't like the way that I'm saying that. I think what I would like to say is that DEI was intended to give more opportunities to those who are competent, and I'm not sure that it's actually worked out that way.
Could I throw in one extra thing with that? Could it be stated that DEI has given chances to some people who may have not had the opportunity, but it has done so at a negative cost to the company?
Could be negative, could be positive. I don't know the numbers
If
well
you
enough
if
to be
you're
able to
saying
argue one or
if
the
you're
other.
at the negative cost to the company, you have to be able to prove that it's a negative cost to the company.
Well,
Like Steve said, it could be either way.
what I'm meaning is that the positive that the person brings on may not be enough to offset all of the other negatives of the DEI program as a whole.
Well, it doesn't have to be just money either, though, and I think we have to be honest about that. Is creating a more inclusive culture at work can also have benefits outside of that. So if you take a work environment that is inherently monochromatic, right? You have a very specific culture there. And then you bring in people with diverse experiences that have different ideas that can make the business actually run better. Let's say that you're a person of color and you have a brilliant idea for a way to cut costs on production, or you have a way to help your employees have a better work-life balance. That doesn't necessarily translate directly to the bottom line, but it most definitely could. So I think there's a little bit of wiggle room there.
But you're comparing diversity of thought to diversity of DEI. Diversity of thought's always been a cornerstone of business. You're always supposed to think of diversity of thought. The way I look at it shouldn't be based on what you look like or what checkbox you are. It should be, okay, do I add value into the corporation? Does that value being knowledge-based, financial, experience, thought process?
Well, I'm not arguing against diversity of thought, man.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, it kind of hampers diversity of thought, because instead of looking at a person as, as an individual, you're looking at the person as, what kind of check marks do I need to make in order for my company to look diverse? It's not diversity of thought, it's diversity, it's faux diversity of thought.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. If you have a government contractor, let's say Boeing or Lockheed Martin, right? And in order to get a government DoD contract, you are required to have a certain percentage of diversity in your company. If you don't, you don't get the contract. Well, I think that would directly oppose what your argument was there. So there's a billion. We might not agree with it, and I don't know you, Bandit, and you don't know me, but I'm actually fairly against DEI. I'm just trying to paint it in the best possible light, and instead of straw manning it, I'm trying to steel man it. And if you give an opportunity to highly competent people that might not have gotten that position before, you are inherently making the business better. But I can see where you're coming. I can see where you're coming from, and I can understand your argument, and it's a valid argument. I'm just not sure that we can narrow it down to absolutes, and to say that it always does harm.
I do agree with SKC's approach. Why don't we, instead of attacking it at the end product of hiring, why don't we tackle it at the beginning stage? So the gap between a DEI person and another person is the same. So instead of looking at it as, okay, we have to have these regulations because there's such a gap and we need to fix this gap, instead of attacking it when the delta or the change is the most, why don't we attack it when the change is the least, when they were a young kid, or give people tests to say, okay, your aptitude is this in say 5th grade. You, based on what your likes and your aptitude, you should go into these fields, and then we can better prep you to be successful at that field. Instead of saying, okay, there's such a big gap at 20 now that we need to pass these laws to make up the gap. I think it's a better use of funds.
I did argue that.
Personnel.
I did agree with SKC on that, and I did argue that because I fully believe in doing it earlier rather than like trying to make up lost ground. Absolutely, I completely agree with your point.
Now, Bandit, on that, there's a rationale of why they don't want to do it that way, and it's hey, it's like, hey, I'm an African American, I'm just being honest about this. because if it was done at that juncture, then you would need to implement certain behavior protocols like, hey, this is zero tolerance because this is a shot at improving your life exponentially, and so forth. There will be some cultural trends that would have a glaring red finger pointed at it as to why certain people are not achieving certain things. It wouldn't be because the evil white supremacist is not allowing me to be able to such and such. It would be, no, a lot of the behavioral mores that are coming from my household are preventing me from taking advantage of this opportunity that I have set before me.
Isn't that a good thing though? Because like it's putting the person as for accountability for one, and it's as a psychological thing. Like if you were told you were never good enough your whole entire life, of course you're gonna hate the society that raised you up because you're a victim. In your eyes, you're a complete victim all the time. If I'm told I'm a piece of shit every single day of my whole life, am I gonna have high self-esteem? Am I gonna say I bootstrap change mentality? Is there going to push back 100%? But if you allow this to happen and within 2 or 3 generations, you're talking to, that's how you change a society for the best. It's not going to happen overnight. There's going to be pushback, but
right, Bandit. But
you want the pushback because that means you're making change.
But if you have that level of pushback, Bandit, then you have other people who greatly benefit from the dysfunction that goes on in said communities from not having their cash cow anymore. They can't claim racism anymore. They can't be in high places trying to basically create all sorts of businesses and various opportunities for themselves and their ilk, because now that would be done away with.
It's the comparison of communism and capitalism. You have a choice. I can't force my views onto you, just like you can't force your views onto me. Everybody has to make a choice. The problem is we don't hold people's choices for accountability. That's the crutch of the whole problem. If you give a person an opportunity, I can't force them to take that opportunity. They have to take that first step. I could force them off a cliff, but they could be fighting me the best they can. I can give them the parachute, but it doesn't mean they're going to open the parachute. You know what I mean? People have to make a choice. And you can't, and that's the sad thing with people. You have to give them the choice to sad to say it, fall on their face. Not being able to meet up, not to build their character, because the only way you can build character is through adversity. You have to have a problem. People that, life is on easy mode, they're normally the most piece of crap people you're ever going to meet. The people that are humble, understanding, work hard, those are the people that pulled up their bootstraps through their whole entire life. And the only way you can gain character is through adversity. And you're robbing people of that by saying, hey, you get this because someone hurt you, or you weren't given the best opportunities, instead of building someone up.
I kind of want to ask, because I do agree with you. I do believe in being a person who is anti-fragile, which is a book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I think I got his name right, where he says adversity is something that you should embrace because it makes you stronger, right? Makes you more resilient. In some cases, it can make you more competent because you have to try harder. Those who try harder succeed better, I think, in my personal opinion. However, I think we can all agree that some cases, whatever you might think that they are, it could be racism, it could be anything really, it could be sexism, misandry, misogyny, whatever. Sometimes those things aren't necessarily inherently good to have to go through, right? So someone who is abused as a child, right? That I don't think we could possibly in any form of ethical morality say that it's better that that person gets abused, right? So there's got to be a cutoff point to where we say, okay, is it beneficial or are we just being assholes?
And that's why we have safety nets. But there's a bare minimum standard for that safety net. If you try hard and you do the best you can, but you keep falling on your face, fine, I will give you credit. If you're showing effort, you're showing you're trying. But if you just go into life and say, I throw the white flag, you owe me this because of I'm this, no, we shouldn't support that. But if you're trying and you keep falling on your face and you fall and you got to get picked back up by people, yes, as a society we should bring those people up. But there's one thing: they showed effort, they showed intent. If you want a handout, that's fine. But you have to show that you deserve the handout. You can't just say, gimme, 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 and, I'm going to give it to you because, I deserve it. No, you don't deserve anything in this life. You have to earn what you make.
So our final question before we end the stream. Steve, I sort of got a sentiment from you that the thought behind DEI was a good one, right? But somehow the implementation has been shit, right? So I want to ask the three of you, what do you think can be done to improve DEI, if at all, to restore it to what it was intended to do? What are those steps that can be taken to, sort of rectify it, or should it be totally abolished? I mean, just taken off the table. Steve goes first, then SKC, then Bandit.
Why you always got to be picking on me, Charles?
Because you're my friend, you're my best friend here, so pick on you more.
I think there's parts of DEI that we can salvage, but I think the first thing that DEI needs to do is practice what it preaches and stop treating all people like a monolith. I think there's room to have discourse on what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion, because I think there is a space for equity. I'm more of a equality person, equality of opportunity. But I think we can still have a conversation and see if there is a space for equity in our society. I don't find that as an abhorrent topic of conversation and debate. My biggest problem is that, I hate to say it this way, but you almost have to clear out the riffraff and really get back to the purity of the movement itself, which is investigating discrimination and discriminating practices, and be honest about the arguments that we're having. For example, if you look at Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality, we all know that parts of our character and parts of our being intersect in different ways. But again, her idea kind of goes off the rail as soon as somebody else takes over the reins. I mean, she even said in an interview that she didn't like how intersectionality was being used in certain circumstances and in certain venues of activism. So even some of these authors don't like how their work is being misused. So I hesitate to just say, well, just because this one aspect of this thing is faulty, then the rest of it must be trash. I think there's room for improvement, but I think the people that run DEI really need to have a serious conversation with themselves and with the broader society. Is like, hey, why are we failing? Why are we not being successful? For one last example, I'll give you this. The left isn't losing because the right is winning. The right is winning because the left refuses to have conversations. They shout down speakers. They accuse them of being Nazis and fascists, and they just disregard the argument rather than actually addressing the argument and being like, okay, well, let's sit down and let's talk about this. Let's hear your side of the story and let's debate this and let the truth be the primary motive focus. They don't do that, and it bugs me as someone who is left-leaning, probably more exceptional than anybody else in our group. Even Stanley, I'm probably more left-leaning than Stanley in some ways, but the problem is that the left cannot communicate effectively, and they're losing because of it. I love my trans friends, but we're losing trans rights everywhere we go because the left refuses to have rational conversations about it. And I think using that example and placing it on top of the DEI industry, they really need to be able to engage in really good, truthful, good faith conversation with the people that disagree with them, instead of just being a Robin DiAngelo and say, well, if you question white fragility, you're practicing white fragility. That's a Kafka trap, and it's not relevant, and it's not helpful, and it's not at all remotely productive. So at some point, if we want to save the ideals that DEI had originally, which were really good, we need to start having a conversation about how to improve it and how to discard the parts that aren't working. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. SKC.
Yeah, I mean, I think DEI needs to be just completely scrapped. The reason being is because I think DEI has a bunch of bad people in it, and it has no mechanism to strain them out. When you see people like I was stating, Ibram X. Kendi running around, doing all of the things that he was doing, and rather than that segment actually calling that stuff out and saying, no, this is not right, they are completely quiet about it, and they continue to allow him to go on to other places like ESPN and make a buttload of more money doing the same thing. So, and then they still use his work, even though they saw in the university that it was fruitless. So you're not dealing with serious people. I mean, you're literally having people that are doing the whole proverbial calling out the straw in someone else's eye while having the rafter in theirs. And as Steve was stating, he thinks that part of that group do not communicate well. Well, here's the rub to all of that. You're talking about the group that actually controls communication departments in most of the universities. What are you talking about? They don't know how to communicate. You see what I mean? So it's like they have no leg to stand on whatsoever.
Well, yeah, they don't communicate. That's why they took it over, is because they can't. So if you can't control a thing, or if you can't do a thing, control the thing. That way you can filter out what you want.
Which sounds like fascism.
Well, bandits.
First off, thanks for having me on, Charles. Nice speaking to you, Steve and SKC. The way I look at it is this: we have two things going for you. You have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and you have DEI. Civil Rights Act of 1964 says you cannot segregate based off sex, religion, national origin, all those things. Okay. And then you have DEI. What has done more for society, the 1964 Civil Rights Act or DEI? Straight up, the Civil Rights Act. You can't have one without the other. If you have DEI, we have to abolish the Civil Rights Act because they're complete antithetical to the Civil Rights Act. You can't have one without the other. And my worry is this whole DEI thing is to take away the Civil Rights Act, because I can't have it and say a law that says you cannot segregate based off race and then have a policy where you have to regulate people based off race. You can't have one or the other. This isn't a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's either one or the other. And I would argue the Civil Rights Act of 1964 well supersedes any other problems that DEI tries to fix. All the problems, if we got rid of this 1964 Civil Rights Act, that would cause so many more problems for society than DEI would ever fix. And that's why DEI has to go, in my opinion, because if you have to abolish the Civil Rights Act, I can't even imagine what America would look like today with race relations, everything. It would be a giant shit show if we got rid of the Civil Rights Act, just because of DEI. And that's why I think DEI's got to go.
Okay. So I'll just give my comments, right? I think there's a lot of merit to what people on the right are saying. I just I just hate bad arguments, right? Bad arguments irritates my soul, even for positions that I agree with. And I see a lot of bad arguments from the right, a lot of straw manning, a lot of, just silly arguments. And it just makes me begin to question, just as they would question the competence of, a black pilot because of DEI. It makes me begin to question the validity of their position to begin with, right? I think that every position should be given as much charity as it's possible, or should be portrayed in its actual form. Then you look at it and tell us why it is wrong, right? Rather than cooking up or making up things about it. So for me personally, I don't care for DEI. I I don't care. I don't care for it enough for me to want to advocate for it. And on the other hand, if it's not um, if it is not resulting in the hiring of incompetent people, then I don't care for removing it either, because I believe that if someone is competent enough to do the job, whatever extra criteria was used, as long as they are competent enough to do the job, well, they are competent enough to do the job. They can do the job. My big quarrel would be if they're not competent at all and they're hired in spite of that because of certain characteristics, then I have a big problem with that. So on this, I'm agnostic. I don't care for it. I don't think it's needed. I don't think it's without DEI, society will still function. Competent people will still get jobs, right? Right. With DEI, if it's not malicious, if it's not leading to a hiring of incompetent people, society is still not going to break down. It's not going to fall. Things are not going to fall out of the sky and all that. That's majorly the point. And I also want right wingers to acknowledge something. They keep harping on competence. They keep harping on meritocracy, but you've got to understand that that's an idealized world. In an idealized world, competency and meritocracy would be the only criteria for hiring people. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, right? In the world that we live in, competency is a big factor, a big part of why people are hired, but it's certainly not the only part. So if you're going to be knocking DEI on the fact that it's adding an extra characteristic of why people are being hired, then you have to go all the way out to say, you know what, nobody is going to be hired for their team spirit or their team what have you, some other characteristics aside meritocracy. And I can tell you for a fact that's not how the world works. Well, it's been a good 2 hours of solid conversation with all of you. I'm so happy to have to be talking to you guys. Steve, SKC, and Bandits that just joined us today. I hope we can do this soon enough. I've been very busy, that's why I haven't been doing much shows, but I'll make out more time and make sure we have these conversations. So if you just come in, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in another live stream. So it's bye for now.
Thanks, Charles.
Hey.
All right. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, SKC.